Whoa, hit the brakes. You've arrived at the #1 drive-by for American history. Welcome to The Pit Stop. Brought to you by In the Past Lane, the podcast about history and why it matters. Here's Edward T. O'Donnell, your host and historian at large.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to The Pit Stop, your Monday morning source for history on the go, in just about 5 minutes. Here's what happened in American history this week. Let's start with birthdays. March 26th marks the birthday of the great New England poet Robert Frost, who was actually born in San Francisco. He was born March 26, 1874. His most famous poem is one you've probably heard at many a graduation, The Road Not Taken. Here's the last stanza. 2 roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled, and it has made all the difference. March 26 is also the birthday of General William Westmoreland, who was born 1914 in Saxon, South Carolina. And he was commander of U.S. forces during the Vietnam War. And he's also the guy who in late 1967 toured the United States telling the American people that there was, quote, light at the end of the tunnel, meaning the Vietnam War would soon be over and we would win it. March 26 is also the birthday of Mr. Spock. Leonard Nimoy was born in Boston, Massachusetts in 1931. March 28th is the birthday of Clara Lemlich, famous labor leader. She was born in Ukraine, came to the United States, and became a garment worker. And she's best known for becoming one of the leaders of a famous strike known as the Uprising of the 20,000 in 1909. March 29th is the birthday of the 10th president. John Tyler was born in 1790 in Virginia. And John Tyler was the first vice president to become president after the death of a president. In his case, William Henry Harrison, who died just about 40 days into his term. And there was no precedent for this, so Tyler just had somebody swear him in, moved into the White House, and began acting like president. And it wasn't until 1967 that the 25th Amendment was passed, and that's the amendment that clarifies presidential succession. March 29th is the birthday of Oscar Mayer. He was born in Germany in 1859, moved to the United States, and became the Meat King. And no, I will not sing the Oscar Mayer Wiener song, although I'm sure just my mere mention of it has triggered it in your head. Sorry about that. March 29th is the birthday of the famed baseball pitcher Cy Young, who was born in Gilmore, Ohio in 1867, and he racked up 511 wins in his incredible Major League career. March 31st is the birthday of the famed African-American boxer Jack Johnson, who was born in 1878 in Galveston, Texas. Johnson became heavyweight champion in 1908. A time of Jim Crow and virulent racism, and his victory triggered an effort to find what was called a Great White Hope. That is, a white boxer who could defeat Jack Johnson and put him in his place. Eventually, Jim Jeffries was coaxed out of retirement to face Jack Johnson in 1910 in what was known as the Fight of the Century. Well, Jack Johnson pounded Jim Jeffries into the canvas to retain his title, and this victory triggered riots all across the United States, leading to the deaths of more than 20 African Americans. March 31st is the birthday of Cesar Chavez, who was born in Yuma, Arizona in 1927. He became the celebrated leader of the United Farm Workers in the 1960s and 1970s, and managed to win higher wages and better conditions for many agricultural workers, many of whom were immigrants. All right, what about events this week? Well, March 26, 1920 is the anniversary of F. Scott Fitzgerald's first novel being published, This Side of Paradise. And this novel launched him to fame and fortune. 5 years later, he published The Great Gatsby. On March 28, 1841, reformer Dorothea Dix began her crusade for the humane treatment of the mentally ill. And that began with investigations of mental institutions in the state of Massachusetts, where she found absolutely horrible conditions. She wrote up a report and presented it to the state legislature. And that began, I proceed, gentlemen, briefly to call your attention to the present state of insane persons confined within this Commonwealth. In cages, stalls, pens, chained naked, beaten with rods, and lashed into obedience. Well, this sensational expose led to sweeping reforms in Massachusetts for the care of mentally ill, and these reforms are copied by many other states. On March 30th, 1867, Russia agreed to sell Alaska to the United States, a deal that was brokered by Secretary of State William H. Seward for the tidy price of $7.2 million. March 30th, 1870, the 15th Amendment to the Constitution was ratified and took effect. And this is the last of the 3 great Reconstruction amendments. And this one guaranteed African American men the right to vote. And of course, just as soon as it was ratified, efforts to undo it began. Efforts that we ultimately come to know as Jim Crow. And these included things like the poll tax and the literacy test, stripping African Americans of that right to vote, reminding us that democracy requires vigilance. March 30th, 1981, that's the anniversary of the assassination attempt on President Ronald Reagan. Also shot that day was his press secretary, James Brady. And Brady and his family would, from that point forward, lobby for tighter gun control. And eventually their efforts became the Brady Bill, which was passed in 1994, which established background checks for gun purchases. Okay, that's going to do it for the pit stop. Let's give the last word to Cesar Chavez. He once said, "God did not promise us that the world would be humane and just. He gives us the gift of life and allows us to choose the way we will use our limited time on Earth." Okay, people, that's your 5-minute history fix to set you up for the week. Now put it in drive and go make your own history.